Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to session 3 of Financial Fitness Fridays. My name's Darren Leverty. I work for Second Sight, part of the Foster de Novo group. And based on your feedback from the last two sessions, the most popular topic for today's Financial Fitness Friday is setting pension objectives and creating a strategy to achieve them. So I was quite surprised, actually. I didn't think that was going to be the case. Now, there's lots of other good stuff coming along over the next few weeks. We've got how to preserve maximum amounts of family wealth for future generations. We've got that coming up. Next week, in fact, we are talking about mortgages and also the getting on the property ladder and property investments. So very popular. If you've got any problems, if you have any problems with technical stuff, then just put something in the chat box and we'll let you know. What we're going to do today, based on feedback from last time, is people wanted to ask lots of questions and we couldn't squeeze it all in. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to finish pretty much on the dot at 1/2 the hour, and then what we're going to do is we are going to let you go. But if you want to hang around, then we're going to be here for questions. I've got a co-host joining us, Jamie, who's an investment expert, so we can ask him a lot of questions as well. So let me crack on with it and get started. So pensions, I've been persuading people to save money into their pensions for their retirement now for many years, and what I've realised is actually, like a lot of any success in life is 80% of it is the psychology of it. It's the wanting to do it, having a strong enough reason to do it. And especially for young people, when we think about retirement being so far out into the future, it doesn't seem to matter enough. And so we want to try and bring that much more into the present. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then hopefully you can see that now. Yes, good. Okay. So let's crack on. So we've talked about in previous sessions the 3 buckets of financial planning. We've talked about the importance of having an emergency fund for the short term, and something which has been very useful for a lot of people, going into the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. We've also talked about medium term investments and getting the money to do some of the work for you. But today we're going to focus on the longer term, based on your feedback, and we're going to ask you to do some feedback at the end of the session today as well. Keep us navigating this down the right road, making sure we're giving you exactly what it is that you want. And thanks very much for those that did feedback last week. Fantastic feedback, very pleased. It really does help us to fine tune this for future events. So we're going to focus on the long term. So let me talk about the most important aspect of this, in my opinion. I'm doing this for many years, and that is that we need to start with the end in mind. When we think about pension, sometimes we think about that word, we think about associated words, and it feels complicated or expensive or negative. But I want you to just wipe your mind clear for a minute and just forget that. Just forget everything you've ever heard about pensions up to now, and just start with the end in mind, okay? We need to decide what it is that we want, and this is where it's difficult for younger people. So how do we do that? How do we actually think about it when it's so far out? Well, the only way we can do that is to really think about it in today's terms. What we need to really identify, and this is simply the most important aspect of pensions, and it is finding out what you want and why you want it. Now, we've talked about budget planners in the past, but doing a budget plan is really important. It's one of those tedious things we put off, but we've got to do it. We know it makes sense if we dedicate the time to doing it. And what that does for us, though, it actually helps us understand our outgoings. And when we work out what you want, it's about what sort of retirement do you want? Well, most of us know what we don't want. So actually, that's not a bad place to start. What we don't want to be is struggling for cash, okay? And then why do you want it? Well, most of the reason we want it is we don't want to be poor when we're retired. And what we've got to think about is a bit like deferring some of our income now to have it later on when we don't want to have to work anymore. So we start with the end in mind, but how, and I've always suggested to people, a good starting place is to think about it in today. Imagine you were retiring today, and imagine the income you're going to need. Now, you might have a mortgage paid off by then, fair enough, but you're still going to have a lot more time on your hands. Instead of having 2 days off each week at the weekend, you can have 7 days a week off. So now it's time to, and this is the most important aspect, to actually fine tune exactly what it is that you want when you get to retirement in today's terms. Let's start there. So go through your budget planner and actually start to, how much spending money do you want? What are you going to need to cover your bills off? Spend some time there. This is the most important bit, because what we need to do is get our mind focused on where we want to go. Because then what happens is we naturally notice and attract into our life the things that help us get what we focus our mind on. So we need to focus. Now, some people say it's so far out, I can't even imagine doing it. I'm so young. Well, yeah, the thing is, you cannot hit a target you haven't set. And there's no motivation there. The more you think about it, the more you polish this up, the more you make it yours, the more you fine tune it, the more important it becomes to you. And what happens is it starts to really matter, even when you think it doesn't. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to work out what it is. If you're retiring today, what would you need? What would you want? Okay, and what would be the minimum? So there's no getting away from it. So we need to make sure that at least we achieve the minimum requirement. The second thing we need to do in there is to make sure that we decide what's the latest age. Okay, so, the state pension age was traditionally 65. For a lot of us now, it's 66, 67, 68. It could go up to 70. But what's your age? What's the age you would like to be able to not work anymore? Now, you might set a target and set a goal, set an objective for income and a retirement age. And I would suggest that if you're 30, 40 years away, that might move, that might change over time. But we do need to get you directionally correct. So we need to have some kind of target, because as I said, you cannot hit a target you haven't set. So there's two things there. Is number one is how much do you want in today's terms and when do you want it? That's where we start. Then the second thing we need to do at a high level, and we go into more detail when Jamie joins us, is we need to find out what you're currently heading for. So now, I would imagine that you're all in a pension scheme, you're automatically enrolled into a pension scheme. We need to find out what you're heading for. What's this going to provide for you in the future, but again, in today's terms? Because when you can see that, two things happen. When you find out exactly what you're heading for in retirement, what happens is, if you're on target, that's brilliant for your financial well-being. You can sit back and relax for now. You can need to review it over time, but for now, you're on track. That's great. That's a great feeling. And you know that for sure. And it's your specific objectives. Second thing is, if there's a shortfall and a gap, we need that. We need that little bit of a moment. That's an emotional moment. We make emotional decisions to change things, and we need that specific problem to be yours, for you to understand it, for you to make decisions to save more. And what happens is, it feels painful to save money for the future when it's so far out. But if you suddenly find out that you're heading for a shortfall, and it's your shortfall, sometimes the pain you attach to that future means that actually it's easier to save today. And that emotional moment is what we're looking for. That's the moment of decision. Okay, so once we've done that, we then need to work out what you need to do to get on target. Okay, so that's the high level strategy, the high level formula. And we'll go into that a bit more detail with Jamie in a moment, but I just want to cover a couple of quick things with you. Just a very, very quick training course on pensions, a pension in plain English. Now, this is a pension scheme. It's not guaranteed. This is what they call a defined contribution. Okay, this is the type of pension you're usually automatically enrolled into. So it's either a group personal pension or it might be an occupational pension. But most of them nowadays are what's called defined contribution. The guaranteed final salary pensions, the defined benefit pensions, are almost a thing of the past for new entrants nowadays, unless you're in the public sector. Now, this is how pension works in plain English. First of all, that pound coin represents your pension pot. Your employer makes a contribution, you make a contribution, you get tax relief, and we get the money to grow. The bigger the pot, the more money you get at retirement. When you get to age 55 or older, okay, so you'll put money in, your employer's putting money in, you get tax relief on it, so it gives you a bit of a boost, and then we get the money to grow, and it grows tax-free. The bigger the pot, the bigger the pension. When you get to 55, you can take a quarter of your pot as tax-free cash, and the remainder of it is there to provide you with an income. Okay, now how you take that income is entirely up to you, and you can worry about that nearer the time. I'm going to give you a quick training session on how you take the income from it. What used to happen up until about 15 years ago was that everybody used to buy what was called an annuity. And that was where you take your pension pot, you get it as big as you can, you exchange it for a guaranteed, you exchange it for a guaranteed income called an annuity. The only trouble with it is that for two things. One is that if you died a bit prematurely, the money can die with you. The other thing was the annuity rates. What we've seen over the years is they've come down a lot. So the amount of income you get from your pot is an example, £100,000 here, £100,000 pot. if you bought an annuity in 1990, okay, that would have paid out at that time £15,500 per year from your £100,000 for life. Now, what that told us is it kind of gave us a bit of a clue as to how long they thought we were going to live for, okay, because they didn't want to be out of pocket. Now, those rates have been coming down and down over time to this year, 30 years later, it's less than a third of what it used to be. So as it's been coming down, the government have had to come up with other ways of taking the income because it wasn't fair to force people just with this one strategy. Now, this might be the right strategy for some people, but for a lot of people now, it's not. So what the government introduced in 2006 was something called income drawdown, where you could actually leave the money invested in your pension, but take a bit of it to live on. Okay, and now it was quite restricted because you had to buy an annuity at age 75. Then in 2011, they said you don't have to buy the annuity anymore. You can now draw down forever, but it was still restricted. There's certain government tables which restrict how much you can take. The reason being they didn't want you to run out of money too quickly, so they kind of restricted it, so you didn't spend it all in one go. But then in 2015, they introduced pension freedoms and said, okay, look, and the bottom line is, you can take as much or as little of your pension pot as you like for age 55. Okay, now you can take 25% of it tax-free. The rest of it you can take all in one go if you so wish, but it does bring with it tax implications on income tax. You've got to be very aware of that, and there's some other issues as well. So never do that without actually getting some guidance on it. Now, the key thing here is that the danger here with pensions freedom is it's running out of money too quickly. Okay, so, but on top of that, retirement used to be about one pension. But retirement's different now. What happens today is we have multiple retirement income sources. So you've got your drawdown from your pension. You might have numerous pensions you've collected over time from your employer. You might have an old final salary pension. You might have an ISA, some savings. You might want to take money from your property. You might have other investments. You might want to phase your retirement so that you don't you retire straight away. Like, you don't end straight away. You might go part-time for 5 years or whatever. And there's the good old state pension. It's still there, okay? And it's probably the date for a lot of people when they're going to retire, actually, because they're just going to top their state pension up with their current planning. But when you look at all of those different retirement income sources, I would suggest that most people will probably have all or some of those when they get to retirement. And to try and manage and optimize all of them, that's probably far too much for any ordinary person to try to do on their own. So that segues lovely into, let me introduce Jamie to the session. Jamie, are you there? Right, I'm trying to find Jamie. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. Ah, I've got a James there, so it might be the wrong person. Bear with me a second. Okay, Jamie Smith, there he is. Right. Here, I found him. So, co-host, Jamie. Are you there, Jamie?
Yes, I am. Yeah, good morning, Darren, and good morning to everybody watching and listening. I have to say, it's great to be back, so thanks for having me on again. And just to pick up on a couple of things that you said so far, I have a suspicion that the reason why this particular area is so popular is because when you think about it, all of us, we'll probably spend something like 20 to 25% of our lives in retirement, assuming that we live a normal life expectancy, and therefore it's just so crucial to our financial well-being. And you're absolutely right about the word pension. It does have a few negative connotations for people. Why don't we just talk about lifetime savings? Because that's what a pension is literally designed to do, last a lifetime. So, all of this absolutely critical for financial well-being. This is all about taking control today. So let's get on with it.
Brilliant. Okay, so Jamie, I have a few questions for you, if that's okay. So I talked about in my introduction that people need to decide what it is they want and how important that is. But then I also talked about they need to try and find out where their current planning is taking them. So how can people obtain a forecast of their current pensions?
Okay, all right. So there are a few different ways of getting a forecast, but I think just to start with, I think people need to be aware of what a forecast actually is. So a forecast is a projection of what you might get in the future. And any forecast is always based on a number of different assumptions. So there'll be assumptions there perhaps about how your pension pot might grow, so the annual investment growth. There might be assumptions there about inflation, for example. So it's important that people understand what these forecasts are based on. But if we're looking at different ways in order to obtain a forecast, as I said, three main ways I can think of. Firstly, ask your pension provider. Really straightforward. Ask them for a projection of what income you might get in the future from that particular pot. Now,
So would that be in today's terms?
It should be in today's terms, yeah, absolutely. So it's taking inflation out of the picture so people can really understand what they would get. It's likely that a projection, a forecast from your pension provider is going to be based on annuity rates. And if you're not targeting annuity, it might not quite match, might not be an accurate reflection on what you want to do at retirement with your pension savings. So just be aware of that. The second way is an online calculator. Now, I've been Googling retirement income calculators, and there is an abundance of them out there. There's some really good ones out there. There's some impartial ones. I've been playing around with the Money Advice Service. I've also looked at the Which magazine calculator, and also PensionWise do a fairly decent one as well. And in addition to that, there's a whole load of providers that have got their own online calculators. Again, if you've got a pension provider, you might want to go online and play around with the one that they offer, but they can be a really useful starting point as well in order to get forecast. And the third way, the final way, is to obtain a professional cash flow forecast. You'll probably need to go to a financial planner in order to do it, but a cash flow modeling is using a software tool, if you like, to paint a picture. You're forecasting, again, looking forward. What does the financial future look like based on your situation, what you want to achieve, your retirement objectives, all of that kind of thing. And you should even be able to use that tool to test how sensitive you might be to certain risks. Stock market crash, for example, springs to mind, perhaps spending more than you intended. So cash flow modeling can be a really useful tool as well. And importantly, what you should be doing is requesting a forecast every year. And that's what many people don't do. They just perhaps look at it once and that's it. Don't look at it again for many years after that.
That's brilliant. One of the most popular questions we get asked is, how much do you generally need to save into a pension? Is there a rough guide? Should it be? Can you be precise?
It can be a bit tricky because it really goes back to those retirement goals, those objectives. So what sort of lifestyle do you want to live when you retire? How much is that going to cost you? And when do you want to stop working? Now, I have got a slide on this, so let me just share this with you first. And what this really tries to do is help people to understand what sort of percentage of their salary they might need to save each year in order to achieve a certain income when they retire. Now, the example that I've used is based on somebody receiving an income of about 2/3 of their pay at age 67. Now, if we look at somebody who's aged 25, we estimate that somebody would need to say roughly 11% of their current salary until they get to age 67 in order to provide them with an income that's equivalent to 2/3 of their current pay. Now, as people get older, we can see here that the contributions increase. So for somebody aged 30, it would be 16%. For somebody aged 35, 21%, 40, 26%. And for somebody aged 45, 32%. So what that tells us, importantly, is the cost of delay. The longer the later you start saving towards retirement, the higher the contributions you're going to have to make in order to achieve that shortfall. Now, as I said, it's only a forecast, so these are based on lots of different assumptions around investment growth, but hopefully helps to give people a bit of an idea about what they might need to do by way of pension contributions. What I would say, and what we know, and this is based on research that we've done here at Foster De Novo, is that generally people are underestimating the size of the pension pot they will need at retirement. And what our research suggested is whatever figure you're thinking of, whatever size pot you think you need, you can add another £100,000 to it, because that's generally what we've estimated that people are understating their pension needs by. There are a couple of ways of working out what percentage you might need to save towards retirement. Again, going back to what we were just talking about before, you've got those online calculators. They should help you with that, and also professional cash flow modelling again will help.
Brilliant. Okay, so just to clarify something, so you mentioned that 11% is a rough guide, a rule of thumb. So when people join a company, they're usually automatically enrolled into a pension. They're quite close to that figure. So if somebody's in their 20s, if they just manage to find an extra few percent, then are you saying they can probably sit back and just relax and that will take them right through to retirement?
Well, again, yeah, hopefully, and again, it depends on lots of different assumptions. It depends on what somebody wants and at which age. But yeah, generally the earlier that somebody starts, the better off they'll be.
Okay, so the other thing was, we talked last week about investments. Now, these are longer term investments. So does the investment strategy, does it differ from something in the medium term, for example? And if so, how does it differ?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the investment strategy is absolutely essential for all of us. And often it's the most complicated part as well. So I'm going to take you back to another slide. And this is based on something that we looked at last week, which was the volatility slide. Some people might remember this. And this just shows us that different types of investments fluctuate differently. So some high risk investments go up and down in value more than lower risk investments. So for example, we've got the blue line, which is portfolio one. This would be an example of a high risk portfolio. And then compared to the red line, it's an example of a low risk portfolio. Now, what many workplace pensions will do for people is they choose a default investment fund. So people don't have to make their own investment choices. If they do nothing at all, your employer will choose an investment fund for you. And typically that investment fund will look like this orange line here. It's a middle of the road, going back to my investment rule from last week, rule number 3, a balanced approach. So that's really important. And generally, if you are a bit younger, if you've got longer until you retire, you might be able to afford to take a little bit more risk. You may be comfortable taking a little bit more risk compared to somebody who's a bit closer to retirement, and perhaps their objective as they're closer to retirement is just about preserving and consolidating the pension of the value of their retirement pot. Also, another thing to mention on workplace pensions is that many these days have what's known as a lifestyling feature. Now, lifestyling is all about the pension provider automatically moving your pension savings into a lower risk investment as you get closer towards your selected retirement age. So I'm going to show you an example of how this works. So this is based on a selected retirement age on your pension plan of 65. And generally, when somebody reaches within, say, 10 years of retirement, it does differ from provider to provider, but let's say somebody reaches age 55, that's when what we call the glide path starts. So that's when the pension provider will automatically start to move your pension savings into those lower risk assets, which should mean less volatility, less up and down. So they do that gradually over a period of, say, 10 years, for example. So at age 65, your pension pot is in those lower risk assets. Now, what's important for everybody is to check the selected retirement age on their pension plan, because if they intend on retiring at an earlier age or even a later age, that can have a big impact on their investments. And I'm going to show you an example of, say, somebody who wants to retire, say, a little bit earlier, age 60, for example. What that would mean is they would need to start lifestyling from not age 55, but age 50, for example. So they would need to start moving their pension pot into those lower risk assets 10 years out from age 60. So from age 50, sorry. So at age 60, they're in those lower risk assets. And again, for somebody looking to retire a little bit later, let's say at age 68, they'll need to start that glide path a little bit later. Perhaps, they start lifestyling at age 58. And this is of course about your investment strategy, because you don't want to be moving out of the market too early, and conversely, you don't want to be in the market too late as well. So really important to check that selected retirement age. And also, just a note, Darren, and we've talked about that's the sort of bit before you get to retirement, but importantly, for most people who are having or taking a drawdown retirement approach, their pension savings will continue to be invested beyond retirement, beyond the date that they stopped working. And so if you imagine you've got a pension pot, and you'll need that to generate you an income in your 70s, in your 80s, in your 90s. So your pension savings should continue to be invested. Now, the FCA, I think they've announced some really positive.
We're running out of time, Jamie, just so you know.
Just a quick one. So the FCA have announced that they are going to introduce so-called investment pathways. So that should help people to take some of the pressure and help them make investment choices about how their retirement pot remains invested after they stop working.
Okay, that's brilliant. Jamie, thank you so much. So the bottom line here is then that people should be working out when their ideal retirement date is, and then changing their pension, going back to their employer, back to the pension provider, and asking to change their retirement date so it's more appropriate and it invests properly, and so it glides through to the right stage for them.
That's right, yeah.
Brilliant. So look, thanks ever so much, Jamie. I know you're going to hang around. I just want to nutshell this. So so number one, you've got to set very, very clear own personal specific goals and objectives. And when you do that, you realize how important it is. When you do that, you get more motivated to want to achieve that. Number two, you've got to find out where your current planning's taking you to see if there's a shortfall. If there's not a shortfall, great news. You can relax for now, review it in a few years. Or if there is a shortfall and a gap, you sometimes need that little moment that's personal to actually make a good decision to maybe save some more. And it might prioritize your savings. Then you're going to work out a saving strategy. And Jamie's touched on some of the ways you can do that with cash flow modeling, and there's some online tools, money advice service. And then also the other thing is to adjust your pension policy retirement age to suit all that work you've just done. So brilliant feedback. Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. I really appreciate it. We have come to the end of the half an hour. So if any of those of you have got other meetings to go to, feel free. We look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to be talking about mortgages and the property market. We've got some more sessions coming up after that regarding preserving family wealth for future generations. So for now, for those that are still on here, I'm going to open it up to questions. I do have a few questions already, so stick the questions in, everybody. I'm going to ask, probably if I can't answer them, I'll ask Jamie. So question here, it's a question to me, but I think Jamie's probably better qualified than me. The question is, do you think annuity rates will continue to fall, or is there any evidence to suggest they might go up again? What's your thoughts, Jamie?
Well, what we know is that annuity rates are linked to interest rates. So generally, as interest rates come down, which they have been doing over the last 10 years or so, then annuity rates have fallen. But when interest rates start to rise again, and that of course will depend on how under control we have inflation. But when interest rates start to rise again, annuity rates will start to rise as well. And I think, Darren, that at some point in the future, annuities will come back into fashion again. I think people will choose a sort of a hybrid approach where they take a little bit of their pension pot flexibly, and perhaps they choose to buy an annuity as well, so they've got some secure income.
Fantastic. So here's another question for you. Is it a good idea to obtain a state pension forecast?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a state pension forecast for anyone close to retiring should be their priority to check their state pension entitlement. And there's a really easy way of doing this. In fact, I've got a slide on this. Let me just share this with you quickly. Here we go. They've got the details here. You can either phone them up, or these days, really easy, check the state pension forecast online. Those are the forms that you can complete. You can go to the government gateway and request it online. And just for those who are wondering, what the state pension is actually worth, at the moment, for those who are entitled to a full state pension, it's £175 a week. So that's the equivalent of £9,000 a year. And if you've got a couple who are both entitled to full state pensions, that's £18,000 a year. That's enough, in my experience, to cover the basic cost of living. And it's really important that people check that they're entitled to that full state pension entitlement, because if you have less than 35 years of national insurance qualifying credits, then you might not be entitled to that full £175 a week. And what you can do, by checking your state pension forecast, you might have the option to buy additional years to make up your entitlement. And do you know what? I had a client, he was an investment banker, and we were looking at his state pension forecast. We were looking at it for his wife, and he was looking at it, and he said to me, do you know what? This is the best investment that anybody can make, because to buy the equivalent of the state pension on the open annuity market, so buying the income from an insurance company, it would cost you about 4 or 5 times more.
Right, okay, powerful. So I think what we're learning here today is that probably one of the most powerful things that people can do regarding their own retirement planning is to actually spend a bit of time each year looking at it.
Yeah, I think that is the most important thing. We all sort of spend a bit of time getting our car service and MOT every year, going to the dentist, getting our teeth checked out. We spend hours perhaps looking for a holiday, trying to book the right one. Retirement is effectively the longest holiday that any of us are going to have. And it's so important that people just take an hour once a year, just to perhaps request some forecasts on what their pensions are worth, look at how their investments are performing. Perhaps people choose to do it the day before the birthday, for example, as a useful reminder, or the day after, something like that. But absolutely, it's so crucial to take that hour each year just to review and check that you're on track.
1 hour each year. So I think I'd heard something years ago where somebody said people spend more time planning their holiday than they do the biggest holiday of their entire life.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I really do.
I think it's because it is off-putting. It's hard to know where to get information. It can be complex. It doesn't have to be. Things are a lot simpler now. I've got a few more questions here. I'm doing for time. Yeah, we've got another few minutes. So I've got a question here that says I've worked at a few places and I've got a few pensions lying around, but I've sort of lost them. Is there a way I can check what they look like and where they are?
Yeah, there is a service. It's called the Pensions Tracing Service. So all you'll need to do is Google it, and it should pop up. What you'll need to know is the name of your employer. And if you type that name in, then it should be able to tell you the employer's pension details. It will have the contact details, the address, the telephone number of the pension provider that provided that workplace pension for that particular employer. Brilliant.
Here's a really good question here. I think this is where, unfortunately, people make decisions because they're not informed enough. And this is always a worry. So now I'm going to ask this question. I think it'll really help everybody that's still on here. And it says, given the massive losses experienced by older people due to the 2008 recession and now COVID, along with an aging population, meaning there's potentially smaller slice of the pie to go around, do you think it's still worth investing in a pension, or should I invest in property or other assets?
Well, I think when we're looking at pensions, why pensions are so attractive is mainly because of the tax benefits of pensions. It's all about that free government money, that tax relief as it's known. So that's why generally when we're looking at options for saving towards retirement, if you're going to get free money, then why not take advantage of it? But I think what's also crucial is, retirement's not just about a pension these days, as you showed on your slides. For many people, it's about having an ISA, perhaps having a second property, having a final salary type pension. That's why it's suddenly become so much more complicated.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about is that when people say about investing in property, they don't get the tax relief, but they don't also get their employer contribution. So
yeah, absolutely.
Employers generally only pay into the pension scheme that's at work. So you always got a head start there. You're sort of doubling your money in most cases or more, plus the tax relief. So it's a pretty good investment. And now that we've got pensions freedoms, we're not forced to buy an annuity at whatever rates are available. We have the freedom to draw that money as and when we see fit from age 55. I think, nowadays they're probably in better shape than they've ever been. Would you agree, Jamie?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Great. Okay, I've got another question here. Somebody's EU resident living and working in the UK, and they decide to stay with Brexit, do they get state pension?
You're entitled to a state pension these days if you've been contributing, making national insurance contributions for a minimum of 10 years.
Great. Okay, what else have I got question-wise? Okay, so this one is just, I'm just trying to pick questions which will help everybody rather than just the individual. If your question here is very much personal to you as an individual, we'll pick it up afterwards. What we want to do is answer questions that are kind of good for the group. So let me just check, they've got time for another question. Okay, so another European question. So there's a lot of people that are Europeans living here. So I'm going to ask the question, being a European living in the UK for the last 4 years, without being certain I can stay in the UK into retirement, should I invest in my pension in the UK or my country of origin?
Well, I think that can be quite a complex answer to that question. I think it depends on your individual circumstances. It also depends on the sort of tax rules, if you like, on the country that you're thinking about perhaps moving to in the future. It can be a really complex question to answer, and often you'll need somebody with knowledge of both pension regimes, and that person can be difficult to find.
Okay, here's an interesting question. What's the best tactic if you have a very aggressive retirement target, looking to retire by age 50?
Well, firstly, get a pension forecast and find out whether you're on track to achieve that or not. And if you're not on track, then you need to understand what actions you might need to take in order to achieve those particular goals and objectives. It might mean that you need to save more now, so it's looking at whether that's affordable or not. It may mean that perhaps if it's not affordable, you might need to rethink those goals, rethink those objectives, perhaps look at retiring later. Or what you could do is just scale back the income, the lifestyle you want to live in retirement. Maybe try and live on a little bit less.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Jem. I've got another question. I know this is a question that's been in a lot of people's minds. They have a number of pensions, defined contribution pensions, several pots. Is it better to combine them, or is it better to leave them separate?
Again, it depends on the individual pots. There can be benefits in consolidating pension pots. There's a few just to think of. Firstly, it can be easier for people to understand what they've got. Often people lose track of their pension pots because they've got too many. We all move jobs from one company to another. We accumulate lots of different pension pots. I've got clients, and this has happened lots and lots of time, clients where we provided some retirement advice, they've come back a few months later, they found another pension pot worth 20, 30. I've even had a client find a pension pot, completely forgot about it, worth £160,000. Imagine finding that down the back of the sofa. So by consolidating your pension pots, they're easier to keep track of, easier to administer, and importantly, easier to monitor and understand how they're performing. And there can sometimes be some potential cost savings as well, but be careful. Word of caution. Sometimes if you transfer a pension pot, you might lose some of the valuable benefits that it has in it. They may have some valuable guarantees, stuff worth keeping. So be really cautious about doing it. You might want to have advice before you go ahead with that.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. I've got one more question, and I think this is a really important question, so I'm going to ask it. Again, this is where people are ill-informed, they haven't got enough information. It's the question, and by the way, everybody here, we are not promoting on this our business at all, okay? Just so you know this, but this is a good question. If you want somebody to help you look at your plan or your portfolio, including your pension, property, ISAs, are you better off speaking to an IFA or an accountant? Not sure who is best placed to advise. Do IFAs essentially look to sell products? So accountant or IFA, and do IFA sell products? Jamie, you can answer that one.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting question, actually. And I think a financial planner is best placed to do that. So what an accountant does is an accountant's there to give you tax advice. But what a financial planner should do is help you develop a suitable financial plan based on your retirement goals and objectives. And they might use various tools in order to do that. We touched on cash flow modeling, but I certainly think a financial planner is better placed to do that rather than...
Are they looking to sell products?
Well, not necessarily. I think, yes, in order to implement a suitable financial plan, The last stage will involve some product, some transaction, perhaps moving from one pension from one place to another, saving more into a particular pot, maybe looking at other types of investments. But any decent financial planner will start off by discussing with somebody what they want to achieve, what their retirement objectives are, and really explore why that's important to somebody. Then they start looking at developing a financial plan and discussing what a suitable one might look like and all the options associated with that. And the third and final stage should then be looking at what products are required in order to implement that.
Yeah, I think it's also just worth making clear, just to end this, and that is that IFAs and financial planners, if there's a product at the end of it, that product provider does not pay them anymore. That was the old days. That was that was nearly 10 years ago. That's all gone. You know, if you want that kind of service, you have to go and find a good advisor, a good planner, and you pay them for the work they do. It does not come from the product, so they're now not biased. They work on your behalf as a client. So you can go and find a good advisor. Ask a recommendation from a friend is a good way to do it. You can go to two websites. One's called Vouched For, and one's called Unbiased. You can put in your local postcode and what you're looking for. I would be looking for someone in this situation who can do cash flow modelling, cash flow forecasting as a place to go. So look, we've come to the end of the time. Thank you very much indeed for jumping on. If you do one thing coming out of this, and that is just go and spend some time deciding what it is that you want. Just, you know, what do you want in today's terms at retirement? How much do you want? Why do you want it? Start there, because I think you'll find the motivation to go through the other aspects of this session today will follow quite naturally. So find out what it is that you want and why you want it. Design your future. Set yourself a target, because you cannot achieve a target that you haven't set. So thanks very much. When you finish, could you do the feedback for us? Really appreciate it. Want to fine tune this going forward, and let us know what other topics and information you want covered off as we go through the next few weeks. Thanks ever so much. Thanks for joining us, Jamie. Really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. See you next Friday.
Thanks, everyone.